Hey guys, tonight we're dropping into the crumbling, candlelit world of a Byzantine librarian. Yeah, you heard that right. Dust, scrolls, sandals, and all. You're waking up in Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, a city so packed with drama, secrets, and smoky incense that you probably won't survive this day without at least one minor existential crisis. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts, like every morning, with bells. Not charming little chimes, no. Heavy bronze ones that shudder through the neighborhood like someone dropped a tower on your hangover. You blink against the early light, your bed just a wool blanket over straw, tucked in a dusty corner of a half-collapsed clerical dormitory near the Forum of Constantine. Your back hurts. Of course it does. You sit up, stretching under your linen tunic, and immediately regret opening your eyes. The sun gleams off the golden dome of Hagia Sophia just enough to remind you that the library bell rings in 20 minutes, and you're already running late. Again. You splash water from a chipped basin over your face. It's so cold it could legally qualify as assault. As you towel off with something that was once a tunic sleeve, the sounds of the city swell, street hawkers shouting about figs, horses clattering on stone, and someone already arguing over icons outside the chapel. The air smells like fish. Not fresh fish, yesterday's fish, warmed slightly by the dawn. You sling on your robe, cinch the belt, and pat your satchel to make sure the wax tablet and stylus are still inside. They are. Barely. Downstairs, the hallway's lit with oil lamps clinging to the last drops of wick. You pass a monk muttering curses in Greek as he tries to scrub soot off a wall with vinegar. The sootin always wins. Out on the street, the chill of early morning hits you. Cloaks swirl, men argue in Latin about grain prices, and a kid nearly runs you down with a wheelbarrow full of cabbage. You dodge left, trip over a stray dog, and land squarely in front of the meat stall. The butcher, Andronikos, laughs in your face. Back to the library, bookworm? You nod, brushing hay from your knees. If I must. Andronikos smirks. Bring me a scroll on how to make my wife stop yelling. That'd be the miracle, bossin. Only if I get one on how to get paid on time, you mutter, resuming your trudge uphill. The library looms ahead. A solemn, slightly crooked stone building squeezed between two churches like it's apologizing for existing. Ivy drapes the windows. A pigeon has clearly made editorial decisions on the entrance lintel. You push open the creaking door and step inside. The silence is instant, thick, sacred. It smells of wax, leather, and mold. Your co-workers, the other librarians, are already inside, hunched over desks, their breath clouding in the chilly air. At least 3 of them haven't shaved in a week. You nod toward Anna, the most senior scribe, who grunts without looking up. There are maybe 2,000 manuscripts in here, some on papyrus, some parchment, a few stone tablets no one wants to lift, all meticulously cataloged, dusted, and promptly ignored by anyone outside the theological elite. But to you, they're everything. You walk the main aisle, fingers trailing along a row of parchment-bound codices. One is slightly out of line. You fix it. You're the kind of person who notices when a book leans a little too left, like it's hiding a secret. The first task today? Inventory check. Again. You grab the wax tablet and scribble your assigned section. Greek commentaries on Aristotelian ethics, shelved B5. Riveting. Still, you scan the shelves with a reverence some people save for saints or wine. Here's a commentary written in Cappadocia with a goose quill so shaky it looks like the scribe was mid-earthquake. There's a scroll in Syriac with footnotes in Latin, clearly the work of a show-off. Your breath fogs in the air as you move carefully. One manuscript's binding cracks ominously in your hands. Another has wormholes you could thread a ribbon through. And nestled deep in a dark corner of the shelf, wrapped in a crusty linen cloth, is your favorite, an old astronomical treatise from Alexandria that no one else wants to touch. Probably because the diagrams look like demon summoning circles. Outside, a bell tolls again. Second hour. Historians still argue whether Byzantine librarians were considered civil servants, monks, or just glorified janitors with ink stains. The truth is probably all three. You guard knowledge. You hoard it. You get yelled at for misfiling it. But you also help decide what stays remembered and what doesn't. In the distance, the city roars to life. You hear chants from the hippodrome, angry priests debating Christ's dual nature in the courtyard, and somewhere, unmistakably, someone singing very off-key about cabbage. As you settle into your desk by the frosted window, you feel it again. That strange satisfaction. You're underpaid, overworked, and occasionally bitten by scroll beetles. But you're part of something bigger. This isn't just a day at work. It's a tiny rebellion against forgetting. The worst part about working in a Byzantine library? Winter. You thought it would be fire, or rats, or theological brawls in the hallway. But no, it's the cold. Specifically, it's trying to work with ancient manuscripts when the temperature drops below the "your fingers no longer work" threshold. You're barely 15 minutes into inventory when your breath becomes mist again, curling above a scroll titled "On the Harmonies of the Heavenly Spheres." You gently unroll it and immediately regret your life choices. The ink has frozen. Not metaphorically, literally. You exhale onto it, hoping to warm it with your breath, but the papyrus just crinkles at you like it's about to give up. The irony isn't lost on you. You work to preserve knowledge, and now you're physically thawing it like last week's leftovers. Anna walks by and grunts again. Try not to snap the scroll this time. You glare at her, but she's already gone, clutching a stack of treatises like they're baby goats. To be fair, Byzantine scrolls have been through worse. Some were buried in jars. Others were rewritten so many times they still echo the ghosts of past text. One scroll here, currently acting as a doorstop, was once a lost Platonic dialogue, overwritten by some 8th century monk who really loved hymn lyrics. Priorities. The librarian's life isn't glamorous. You're not lounging around in golden robes quoting Homer. You're crouching in corners, whispering, "Please don't crumble," to things older than most churches. But hey, you knew what you signed up for, sort of. You rub your hands together, trying to conjure some body heat. The window beside you is crusted with frost. Outside, snow begins to flake down over Constantinople, cloaking domes and rooftops like the city is exhaling slowly. Inside, not quite so peaceful. A novice scribe nearby lets out a small shriek. You look up. He's holding a stylus with a snap tip and ink all over his tunic. Again, he flails. "It got in my mouth." You raise one eyebrow. "You're lucky. Last week it was Beetlejuice." That's not a joke. The reddish pigment used in some illuminated manuscripts. Crushed beetles. Vivid color, sure, but also weirdly spicy if you accidentally taste it. Not that you have. Probably. Historians still argue whether Byzantine librarians were trained as artists or just copy monkeys with a good eye for margins. The answer is probably yes, a bit of both. You were taught how to copy, how to correct, and most frustratingly, how to sit still for 12 hours at a time without damaging your spine. You return to the frozen scroll. You manage to peel back a few inches of it, just enough to make out the first lines. Greek script, sharp, slightly erratic, definitely written by someone with opinions. The stars sing their own truths, regardless of the empire's noise. Nice, poetic, totally unhelpful when your toes are turning blue. You roll it up again, gently, and place it back on the shelf, layered in wool scraps to keep the worst of the damp out. Nearby is a heating brazier, currently out of charcoal. Typical. You consider asking someone to relight it, but the last time someone brought fire into the archives, it ended with 2 burnt prayer books in an awkward silence during evening vespers. Instead, you grab your next task, an inventory ledger with pages so stiff you could use them as shields. The morning passes in a shivery blur. You cross-reference shelf numbers with ledger notes, trying to figure out if a particular herbal manual was stolen, misplaced, or just sacrificed to mice. No one's sure. The marginalia says lent to Brother Theodosius, but he's been dead 5 years and never returned anything anyway. Suddenly, a clattering sound jolts you. A jar of ink has hit the stone floor. Smashed. The scent of vinegar and lampblack explodes in the air. You see it deeply. It's the third time this month. A new apprentice runs over to clean it, slipping on a loose parchment. You watch the mess unfold with the weary stare of someone who's seen a bishop trip over a psalter before communion and just kept chewing lentils. This is normal. You walk toward the back shelves for some quiet, past rows of manuscripts so densely packed, the air itself feels older. Here lie works from Alexandria, scraps from Antioch, banned Persian texts hidden behind safer commentaries, and scrolls that are less read than worshipped. You find your favorite hiding spot, a nook between two carved bookcases, half-shadowed, near the old index shelf. It's quieter here. You can almost hear the scrolls breathing. The dust is thicker. The cobwebs are braver. You settle in and take out a small parchment in desperate need of repair, an annotated copy of Galen's medical works. The notes in the margin are hilarious. One reads, "This makes no sense. Maybe try honey instead." Another just says, "Nope." You smile. Some librarian centuries ago scribbled sass into history, a reminder that even in a world of monks and emperors, sarcasm endures. Suddenly, a high-pitched shriek echoes from the scriptorium. You freeze. The last time someone screamed like that, a rat had climbed into the lectern. But this, it sounds different. You rush back in to find the same novice staring at a scroll like it's cursed. "Look," he whispers, the ink changed color. You peer over his shoulder. It's a manuscript on meteorological omens. The ink has turned slightly green. "Ah, copper sulfate," you say. "The scribe used it to mix the pigment. Changes with the moisture." He nods, wide-eyed. "So it's not a demon?" "Not unless the demon's obsessed with cloud patterns." You walk away, hiding your smile. That scroll's pigment was likely imported through Armenian traders who brought minerals from the Caspian Mountains. It's not magic, just chemistry, but you let the novice think it's a little bit of both. Sometimes the myths keep the manuscript safer. Outside, the snow thickens. Inside, you huddle closer to the brazier, now finally rekindled with charcoal and divine mercy. You're not warm, but you're less frozen. Progress. You unwrap a new scroll. It creaks. You mutter encouragement. Another page, another line, another frozen breath. Just a regular day in paradise. You're not sure what's worse, cold scrolls or lukewarm gossip. Breakfast in the library refectory is less banquet and more survival nibble. You sit cross-legged on a splintered bench, your plate wobbling precariously on your lap. Today's menu? Crusty barley bread, olives so bitter they could win arguments, and a clay cup of watered-down wine that tastes faintly of regret. The other librarians slowly filter in. Most look like they haven't slept since Constantine was crowned. Their robes are dusted with ash, ink, or yesterday's lunch. Or all three. Across from you, Demetrios is already chewing like he has a personal vendetta against his bread. "Did you hear?" he mutters between bites. The Empress might commission a full copy of the Psalter, illuminated, with gold. You arch an eyebrow. That's what she said last month, and the month before, still waiting for that golden payment. Another librarian, Helena, snorts. You think she reads? She probably thinks illuminated manuscript means it glows in the dark. The table erupts in a quiet chuckle. That's the thing about this place. It runs on sarcasm almost as much as it does on candle wax. You pull an olive from the communal bowl and chew slowly, mostly to kill time. The walls here are lined with old frescoes of saints who look exhausted, like they, too, have just sat through 15 drafts of the same imperial edict. One even has a visible eye roll, if you squint. The conversation meanders as the food dwindles. Someone brings up a rumor that the emperor himself visited the upper archives last week. Another swears they saw a eunuch carrying out scrolls under a red velvet cloth. You shake your head. Unless he was hiding Cicero under his robe, I don't care. Still, there's something electric about the gossip. Low voltage, yes, but sparking just enough to keep you awake. Historians still argue whether librarians in Constantinople had much political influence, or were simply part of the background noise of imperial life. You know better. A clever librarian can make or break a policy with a misplaced scroll or a conveniently lost reference. You've seen it happen. Of course, you'd never admit it. Officially, you're just a humble guardian of parchment and papyrus. Unofficially, you're an information broker. You finish your bread and brush the crumbs off your tunic. Time to head back to the chaos of the scriptorium. But first, a stop in the storage alcove. You duck into the cramped room, lit by a single guttering candle. It smells like mildew and beeswax. On the shelves are sealed jars of ink, blocks of pumice stone, spare quills, and, if you're lucky, cheese someone forgot last week. You rummage for a fresh stylus, muttering to yourself. That's when you find it, a half-eaten pomegranate just sitting there on a ledger. Who leaves fruit next to 4th century legal documents? You sigh, then laugh quietly. Probably Basil. He's been trying to eat healthier ever since that monk told him he was too earthly, whatever that means. Back in the scriptorium, the mood has shifted. Quills are scratching, ink is flowing, and someone's humming an off-key hymn about divine fire. It's weirdly soothing. You settle into your desk. Today's assignment: review a commentary on the Book of Revelation copied by an apprentice who, judging by the margins, may have had a head cold and theological doubts simultaneously. You flip through the manuscript. On page 3, there's a doodle of a dragon. Page 5, a scrawled "Why 7 seals though" in faint Greek. You shake your head, amused, not scholarly, but honest. The apprentice will probably become a bishop someday. As you correct a spelling error, beast accidentally written as bread, you feel a familiar thrum in the walls. A low rumble. Earthquake? No. Just the monks upstairs rehearsing hymns. With stomping, lots of stomping, your teeth rattle slightly. You continue. A fringe fact most don't realize? Librarians in the empire had to learn how to read not just the sacred and the classic, but the ugly stuff too. Complaints from tax officials, angry letters from bishops, even grain shipment logs from Syria written in the world's messiest shorthand. You once spent an entire afternoon translating what turned out to be a shopping list from 876 AD. Spoiler alert, they bought a lot of fennel. You get up to stretch. Your knees pop like dice in a cup. Behind you, Anna is rolling out a massive scroll, one of the older ones, stitched together from patched segments. It unravels dramatically onto the floor. "Oh no," she mutters. You already know. Someone stitched 2 unrelated texts together again. One half is on divine grace. The other is a property dispute between 2 widows and a very aggressive rooster. You both stare at it for a second. "Let's pretend we never saw it," you say. Deal. Sometimes the work is too absurd to fix. By mid-morning, the light outside shifts. The snow tapers. You crack the window slightly, just enough for a breath of crisp air, and hear the distant clanging of metal on stone. Soldiers training in the square again. It's comforting in a strange way, like a heartbeat you're not in charge of. You sit back down, flip a page, and try not to spill ink on your sleeves. Again, this is what your day looks like. Bread and rumors, frozen ink, and sarcastic footnotes. You're not changing the empire. You're not winning wars, but you're preserving the conversations of people who once thought they were. And that matters, even if your olives taste like regret. Ink doesn't want to flow a day. You dip your stylus again, swirl it slowly in the ink pot like you're casting a reluctant spell, and still, nothing. Just a weak, watery smear that goes across the parchment and dries with all the gravitas of boiled cabbage. You sigh, loudly. It's cold again. Surprise, surprise. And when it's this cold, even the iron gall ink gets moody. You warm the stylus tip between your fingers, then over a candle. Carefully, mind you. You've burned enough quills in your time to know fire and paperwork are a dangerous pair. Across the scriptorium, Demetrios is muttering oaths in Koine Greek under his breath. You glance over. What is it this time? He slams a parchment shut. Someone copied dog instead of God. In the beginning was the dog. You snort. Man's best friend in the word. He's not amused. You would think, in a room full of sacred texts, everyone would behave like saints. But no, there's constant bickering about spelling, margin width, and whether the capital sigma should lean left or not. There's a running feud over whether dots over iotas are modern corruption or necessary clarity. It's like calligraphy fight club, except everyone's seated and passive-aggressive. A scholar from Alexandria once told you, to copy is to risk immortality. You didn't quite understand it until your third hour of redrawing the same decorative E. Now you feel that existential dread in your wrists. You glance down at your current task, recopying a Psalter page that some overzealous apprentice decided needed flair. By flair, you mean he drew 12 angels, one with sunglasses, not exactly doctrinal. You erase slowly, carefully, each scrape of the knife lifting pigment like you're peeling a memory off skin. That's the work. Silent, deliberate, endless. You shift in your chair and your back audibly protests. You twist to stretch and hear a vertebrae pop that hasn't spoken since Epiphany. Movement earns you glares from two scribes who are mid-sentence. You shoot them a "don't test me" look. You've had 3 cups of chicory root brew and no real breakfast. You are not above passive-aggressively reshelving their texts upside down. Then finally the ink cooperates. You dip, write, and the stylus glides. For a brief, miraculous moment, the letters look clean, balanced, almost divine. You get through a whole verse before the candle guttering nearby throws wax onto the margin. Of course, you look up at the ceiling as if appealing to heaven itself. Was that necessary? A distant creak echoes back. Or maybe it's the wind. Historians still argue whether Byzantine scribes had personal flourishes or were strictly bound to standard script. You know for a fact it depends on who's watching. When Anna is around, you're a model of uniformity. When she's off reviewing imperial tax decrees, you add a little flair of your own, a curl here, a hidden pun in the margin. Once you snuck in a tiny drawing of your supervisor as a goat. No one's found it yet. You need the joy. Because otherwise, the hours start to blur into each other. Lines of psalms mixed with lines of legal codes. One moment you're transcribing praise for divine mercy, and the next you're rewriting marriage laws involving sheep and land boundaries. And sometimes you write too fast. One of your worst mistakes? You once copied an entire page backwards. Mirror writing. You didn't notice until the illuminator threw a brush at your head. He was right. You were sleep deprived. 3 nights of late shifts you had left your brain melting out your ears. The scriptorium itself doesn't help. It's drafty. The light is awful. The desks are warped. And yet, it's the only place you feel like time doesn't control you. There's something holy in the repetition. Something weirdly rebellious in the stillness. You take a break. Step outside for a second, just to get circulation back into your legs. The air is icy and crisp. The sun cuts through the clouds in narrow beams, catching the golden mosaics on the chapel across the courtyard. You watch as a nun carries a bundle of wood past the fountain. Her breath rises like incense. A pigeon lands near your foot, regards you, then waddles away in judgment. Fair. Back inside, someone's arguing over spacing again. The line breaks are off, a scribe hisses. No, they're poetic. See the rhythm? There's no rhythm in Leviticus. You walk past them toward the ink store, grateful your ears still function despite everything. You need more gall ink. The good stuff, not that watered-down mess you used this morning. The apothecary who manages supplies is a grumpy old man who claims to have met Hippocrates in a past life. He hands you a bottle while listing off all the ways it could kill you. If it splashes in your eye, you'll go blind. Thanks. If you drink it, your tongue will turn black. Good to know. If you leave the lid off, the vapors might, "Yep, gotta go." You retreat before he starts describing boils again. Back at your desk, you light another candle and ease back into the Psalter. This time the text flows, the rhythm returns. You find the groove, downstroke, pause, loop, flick. It's like breathing through your fingertips. You become part of the text, part of the page, like your hand was always meant to do this. And then you write the word mercy with such clean symmetry, it stops you cold. Just for a second, there's something there, not divine exactly, but full, like you've captured the echo of something big. You lean back, satisfied. Then the door slams open. A courier storms in, panting. An imperial clerk just arrived. He says he needs a genealogy scroll by noon. You blink. Which genealogy? He shrugs. Someone's cousin, from Antioch, dead, but important. You groan, already getting up. So much for flow. You don't even get to put your quill down properly before the chaos lands in your lap. The courier stands there, breathing like he's run from Thessaloniki, sweat soaking his collar despite the cold. He holds out a scroll case, sealed with the imperial sigil, red wax stamped with the two-headed eagle. You take it slowly, eyeing it like it might explode. You said a genealogy scroll, you ask? He nods, gulping air. A cousin of someone important, possibly dead, definitely aristocratic, needs verification, and it needs to be copied, cleanly, onto parchment, before the sixth bell. You glance at the water clock near the scriptorium arch. It's third bell. That gives you, maybe 3 hours if no one sets something on fire. Which, given this place, is wildly optimistic. You open the scroll. It's worse than expected. The handwriting is a disaster, compressed, erratic, and slanting in a way that makes you wonder if the original scribe was being chased while writing it. Names are smudged. Lineage is questionable. There are 3 people named Theophylactus in a row. 2 might be the same guy. One is apparently also a bishop and a horse breeder. You sigh, already feeling your soul crumple. A phrase you hear often among librarians. It's not about what's true, it's about what looks official. You take the scroll to the scriptorium table reserved for imperial nonsense. It's an actual table, lopsided, stained with wine, and covered in 1,000 scratch marks from rushed rewriting jobs. You flatten the scroll, smooth the parchment with a warm stone, and mutter a quiet prayer to Saint Jerome, patron of translators and tired people. You grab a fresh sheet of treated calfskin from the shelf, a clean, pale sheet that smells faintly of lye and old air. Expensive stuff. You only get to touch it when nobility is involved. You begin to copy. Names first, columns of them, arrows, brackets, marriages, titles like Sebastocrator, Logothete, and some guy who claimed descent from Achilles. You do your best to make it elegant. Your quill scratches softly across the parchment. The ink is finally behaving, and despite the pressure, there's something kind of satisfying about wrangling messy names into clean, straight lines. Historians still argue whether these kinds of genealogies were preserved for accuracy or ego. You know the answer? Ego. No one cares about a dead cousin unless there's land, titles, or a marriage contract involved. Usually all 3. A clatter behind you breaks your focus. Anna has dropped her ruler again. She glares at it like it personally betrayed her. I swear it moved. You shake your head and return to the scroll. There's a weird note halfway through, possibly related to Saint Basil. Needs confirmation. You hesitate. Then you write it anyway, adding a polite asterisk and a decorative vine around it. That way it looks sacred instead of speculative. Decorative uncertainty is the Byzantine way. Around you, the scriptorium buzzes. Pages rustle. Ink pots are refilled. Someone sneezes so violently, a wax tablet flies off the desk. You tune it all out. You're in the zone. You finish the family tree, careful not to let the quill scratch too hard near the edge. Then you add the imperial seal mark in the corner, just the outline. Someone more important will ink it in later. You're not trusted with that part. You let the ink dry while you stretch your fingers, which are now a lovely shade of charcoal gray. Your neck cracks like old floorboards when you tilt your head. The courier comes back, peeking around the doorway like he's worried he'll be slapped with a scroll. You hold up the finished copy. He looks shocked. Already? You nod, handing it to him with a forced smile. Tell whoever wanted it that Theophylactus the Elder and the Bishop of Pergamon might be the same person. Or married to the same cousin. I don't know anymore. He stares at you. We'll write that down. Maybe. You watch him disappear into the hallway, scroll case under one arm like a courier of nonsense truths. That's the job. You return to your desk and take a deep breath. You've got ink on your chin, parchment dust on your sleeves, and the taste of sour wine still lingering from breakfast. You're vibrating with the effort of writing noble lies beautifully. Demetrios appears next to you with 2 cups of hot, spiced chicory brew. One is for you. You take it gratefully. You survive? He asks. Barely. The guy had 3 mothers. He nods. That it's Byzantium. You both sip in silence. The thing they never tell you about being a librarian here, it's not just books. It's bureaucracy, memory, drama and ink. You've read treaties that were actually break-up letters between noble houses. You've seen prayer books filled with insults between rival monks. Once you found a ledger where every tax was listed under God's will. That's some high-level gaslighting. There's a kind of power in it, though. Quiet power, the ability to shape reality with a line of script or a footnote. You write and people believe it. Not always because it's true, but because it's written. And once it's written, well, it lasts. Sometimes you don't realize how hungry you are until your stomach starts composing its own psalm of lamentation. Lunch in the library courtyard is an ancient ritual. Not because it's sacred, just because the benches haven't been replaced since Emperor Justinian wore sandals. You lower yourself slowly, praying that the wobble in the wood is just age and not termites. Today's spread is aggressively humble. Lentil stew, more like lentil water. Crusty rye bread, so dense you could use it as a weapon. And a handful of shriveled grapes that someone insists are perfectly ripe. Spoiler, they are not. You cradle the warm bowl of stew in your hands like it's a small, edible miracle. The heat seeps into your fingers and pulls the cold out of your bones. You tear off a hunk of bread and dunk it without shame. Across from you, Demetrios is already halfway through his meal, mumbling about ink supplies. Helena sits beside him, flipping through a scrap of parchment filled with marginalia about dreams and demons. I still say Aristotle was divinely inspired, she mutters. You roll your eyes. You mean he accidentally got half the cosmos right and everyone's been building monasteries around it since? She smirks. Blasphemy. You'll be scrubbing icons before Vespers. You shrug and spoon in more stew. It's not great, but it's warm and it didn't come from a jar labeled property of the tax office. So you call that a win. Lunchtime is when the library's real opinions emerge. Not in the manuscripts, but in the mouths of overworked, ink-stained librarians who've spent too much time copying sermons and not enough time seeing sunlight. Someone across the yard shouts, "Philosophy is useless unless it fixes my roof." Another replies, "That's stoicism. It fixes your attitude about your roof." Laughter ripples through the courtyard. The pigeons flutter up, offended. Helena tears her bread into smaller pieces and says, "I found something weird in a Syrian manuscript this morning. Said the stars could predict if a child would be left-handed." You raise an eyebrow. Astrology? She nods, mixed with medical notes, possibly from a Nestorian physician. The handwriting's incredible, like the guy wrote with a single hair. You hum thoughtfully. Historians still argue whether astrology was tolerated in medical texts or just politely ignored. Demetrios chimes in, deadpan. They ignored it right into canon law. You all laugh again. That's the thing about working here. You don't just preserve knowledge, you marinate in it. It leaks into everything, your food, your jokes, your dreams. You wake up sometimes reciting obscure bits of legal code. You've caught yourself explaining plot twists in Homer like they're gossip. You tear off more bread and stare at the sky. It's clouding over. Again. Constantinople doesn't really do seasons. It does soggy and less soggy. You watch as clouds slide across the sky like smudges on glass. One time, a storm came through so suddenly it flooded half the archive room. A whole week's worth of sermons warped like soggy lasagna noodles. You ended up recopying the epistles with the sniffles and 3 blankets. Helena pulls something out of her sleeve, a folded slip of parchment. You won't believe what I found tucked inside the life of Saint Macrina. You lean in. She unfolds it carefully. It's a tiny prayer, but not in Greek, Latin, and not classical Latin, somewhere between street slang and love poetry. Demetrios leans over your shoulder. Looks like a secret love note. You squint. Something about stars in her eyes, or figs in her bed. Helena grins. Exactly. It's not rare to find things like this. Private notes slipped between pages, lost over decades or centuries. Love letters, recipes, doodles. Once someone found a tiny sketch of a cat chasing a demon. Another time, a curse against someone named Theokritos, who apparently smelled like boiled onions. You wonder what future scribes will think of your marginalia. Probably that you had a slight obsession with fish jokes and wrote too many notes to yourself like, remember to blink. Lunch winds down. The stew's gone. The bread has fought its last battle. Someone somewhere is already ringing the bell that says, stop sitting and start scribing. You stand slowly, every joint protesting like you've aged a decade. You stretch, then brush crumbs off your tunic. Before heading back, you take a detour. There's a tiny cloister garden tucked behind the west wall. Few know it's there. It's where failed illuminations go to die, pages torn out, faded pigments, flawed gold leaf that looked more like banana peels. You love it. You kneel near the edge and pluck a small sprig of mint, just for the scent. It cuts through the stew lingering on your breath and the chaos clinging to your brain. A fringe fact, some librarians here chew herbs to stay awake or sharp. Sage for memory, mint for clarity, rue if you're feeling bold or reckless. Once, a visiting monk chewed basil all morning and started reciting prophecy by accident. You walk back inside, mint tucked behind your ear, heart a little lighter. As you step back into the scriptorium, someone shouts, "Who copied the chrism prayer backwards?" You freeze. Demetrios? Innocent shrug. Helena? Whistling, you? Suddenly fascinated by a nearby pillar. But hey, it's just another lunchtime sin to confess tomorrow. You were hoping for a quiet afternoon, but instead you've been handed a scroll that looks like it survived a flood, a fire, and possibly a very angry cat. Its edges are crisped, parts of the ink have bled into ghostly tendrils, and the binding twine smells like old pickles. It's your next task, decode and recopy. Of course it is. You clear space at your desk, which currently contains 3 styluses, an empty ink pot, a dried fig you forgot to eat, and a scrap of parchment where you accidentally wrote the Greek word for nose 17 times while thinking of something else. Focus, you tell yourself. The scroll is a mess, but a fascinating mess. It starts in Greek, halfway through switches to Latin, then dives into Coptic, throws in a few lines of Syriac, and ends in what looks like Hebrew shorthand in the most illegible footnotes you've ever seen. And you've seen some monstrous footnotes. You squint. Is that a het or just a very tired E? This is the multilingual madness that no one warns you about when you're learning how to be a Byzantine librarian. You think you'll be dealing with tidy columns of scripture and neat classical poetry. Instead, you get scrolls that look like they were dictated by a polyglot with commitment issues. You unravel it further and realize, oh, this isn't just some monk's notebook. It's a scientific commentary, possibly astronomical, tangled with theological asides. At the top margin, someone has scribbled, as above, so also, sometimes not. Incredible. You begin decoding line by line. The Greek is fine, it's a little rushed but familiar. The Latin is a stiff, legalistic style, almost certainly from a Romanized Syrian source. The Coptic section refers to lunar phases and something called the third breath of the moon. Sounds poetic, might be a calendar quirk, or a medical metaphor. Historians still argue whether multilingual manuscripts like this were meant for scholarly use, ritual instruction, or were just the work of manic collectors. You're leaning toward chaos gremlin with a deadline. You stop to sharpen your stylus and think. Your fingers are already ink-stained. Your spine is attempting to become a question mark. Helena drifts by and peers over your shoulder. That looks cursed. Only emotionally. She nods solemnly and places a honey sesame pastry next to your elbow before vanishing. She knows. You'll owe her a favor, probably during the next scroll rescue emergency. You dive back in. The Syriac is difficult. It's written in a Strangula script, flowing and tangled. But you recognize a few recurring phrases, planetary alignments, symbols for Mars and Saturn, references to ancient calendars, possibly a blend of astrology and agronomy. You're beginning to suspect this scroll is a practical farmer's guide disguised in holy commentary. Of course it is. The Hebrew section is even harder. It's marginal and mostly abbreviated, possibly Kabbalistic. One line reads, Balance is found between the third hour and the shadow of the lion. Poetic? Yes. Helpful? Less so. You pause, flex your aching fingers, and laugh quietly to yourself. No one outside this room would ever believe this was your job. You're not just a librarian, you're a code breaker, an amateur theologian, a handwriting analyst, and apparently a part-time astrophysicist. You sip lukewarm chicory brew and push onward. There's a section labeled "For the Times of Eclipse." The language is careful, reverent. It describes the darkening of the moon as a sacred interruption, a divine blink. You pause there, something about that phrasing hits different, like a truth half buried under metaphor. You make a note in the margin, not for anyone else, just for yourself. Divine blink, possible sermon starter, or bedtime story. A tiny beetle crawls across the top of the scroll. You flick it gently off the parchment before it gets any ideas. Beetles are drawn to the glue in older scrolls. One time, you saw 3 of them chew straight through a translated Galen tract on spleen function. Another time, someone found a beetle inside a scroll, so well preserved it looked like it had been embalmed in ink. You reach the final section, badly faded. Some of it's rewritten in a different hand, suggesting a later scribe tried to preserve it. There's a line in Latin that reads, "He who understands this text will know when to plant and when to pray." You nod slowly. That tracks. You flip to your wax tablet and begin making your own transcription. Not a full copy, there's no time for that yet, but enough notes that you can later decide if this goes into the practical guide's shelf or the unclassifiable weirdness box. A reminder, the Byzantine library isn't just a cathedral of canonized texts. It's a sponge for oddities. You've got scrolls that start as gospels and end as math problems, books with recipes for goat liver wine and prayers to ward off itchy spirits. One treatise is just 30 pages of colored dots, and no one knows why. You finish your transcription and sit back. The scroll is almost endearing now, like a conversation across centuries that spirals in and out of coherence. Maybe the scribe didn't mean for it to make perfect sense. Maybe they were just capturing the way knowledge feels, layered, multilingual, contradictory, and still sacred. You gently roll it up and place it in a fresh linen wrapper. Label it as mixed cosmological scroll. Condition, fragile, possible agricultural use. Then you put it in the review later basket, which is really just the hope someone smarter deals with this pile. As you stand, your knees creak again. You glance at the candle beside you, almost burned down. Time flies when you're arguing with 6 languages and possibly the moon. You stretch, yawn, and mutter, "One day I'm going to find a scroll with nothing but jokes and recipes." You probably won't, but a librarian can dream. You barely get a moment to stretch when the scriptorium goes tense. 2 scholars, older, grumpier, and both exuding the specific type of arrogance only tenured theologians can carry, are hissing at each other like rival alley cats. You recognize them immediately. One's brother Makarios, a staunch traditionalist who believes anything not written in Greek before 400 AD is heresy. The other is Theodore, a fiery deacon with a passion for Persian philosophy and a soft spot for anything remotely forbidden. They're standing near the controversial manuscripts cabinet. The fact that such a cabinet even exists says a lot about this library. You wander closer, pretending to be occupied with a basket of spare parchment scraps. Eavesdropping is, after all, a core skill in the librarian toolkit. Makarios jabs a crooked finger toward an unassuming codex. This has no place in a Christian archive. Persian astrology, symbolic dream interpretation, it's practically Zoroastrian. Theodore fires back, voice sharp. Knowledge doesn't stain the soul, it expands it. Just because something isn't from Athens or Antioch doesn't make it evil. Round 70 of the to ban or not to ban debate. You've seen this before. Yesterday, in fact, over a manuscript describing how lunar cycles affect crop yields. Somehow it turned into a lecture on demonic influence in legumes. The codex in question today is slim, bound in worn leather, and rumored to contain astral calculations alongside mystical metaphors for divine emanations. In other words, peak, Maybe we should read this under a blanket with the door locked. Energy. You've skimmed it before. It's beautiful. Handwritten in Persian with marginal notes in Arabic and some very nervous-looking Greek scribbled later. The diagrams alone are enough to make your brain itch. Historians still argue whether manuscripts like this made their way into Byzantine libraries through trade, war, or rogue scholars copying them in the dead of night. Probably all three. Knowledge flows in through cracks, no matter how tight you shut the door. Makarios crosses his arms. There are lines in here suggesting the stars dictate destiny. That undermines divine will. Theodore shrugs. Maybe God wrote the stars. You snort laugh a little too loud. Both men glance at you. You raise your hands, defensively. Just appreciating a solid metaphor. Carry on. Makarios scowls. Theodore gives you a conspiratorial grin. And that's when Anna shows up. Thank the saints. She marches between them like she's parting the Red Sea, her presence enough to silence both men with a single arched eyebrow. She snatches the codex, until the patriarch himself decides this stays shelved under astral speculation. You both have work, unless you'd rather sort worm-infested papyri all afternoon? Makarios blinks. Theodore opens his mouth, then thinks better of it. They disperse like scolded children. You exhale and approach Anna. What is in that thing, really? She flips it open. You both scan a page together. It's dense. A line in Persian catches your eye, helpfully glossed in Latin. The throne of the moon is made from memory. You murmur, that's either theology or poetry. Anna closes the book with a sigh. Either way, we're going to have to move it again. Too many hands reach for it. You nod and she hands it to you. Find it a quiet spot, which is code for hide this where no one without a death wish will look. You wander to the eastern alcove, seldom used, currently housing obscure Armenian sermons and 2 scrolls about monastic goat-keeping practices. You wedge the codex deep between the shelves, behind a cracked translation of Ptolemy. Safe, for now. The truth? This happens more often than you care to admit. The line between forbidden and forgotten is razor thin here. Some texts get shelved, others get shelved out of sight. A subtle difference, but one that shapes what survives and what gets quietly erased. You head back to your desk, head buzzing. The debate sticks with you, not just because it was loud, but because it was real. People forget how alive ideas are. They fight, mutate, and sneak into new shapes when no one's watching. Back at your station, you find a note in your wax tablet, scrawled by Helena. That astrology book? I checked the charts. You're probably going to get yelled at later. Mercury's in Leo. You snort. Mercury's in Leo and you're up to your neck in celestial drama. Seems about right. The bell rings. 5th hour. You take that as your cue to pretend nothing happened and look extremely busy. You grab the nearest stack of texts and begin sorting them by language, topic, and whether or not they've been scribbled in by bored monks. One has a full limerick in the margins about a nun with a pet goose. You're honestly impressed by the rhyme scheme. The problem with candles is that they forget their fire. One moment they're politely illuminating your careful copying of St. Basil's sermons, and the next, one tips sideways off its iron holder with all the grace of a drunk acrobat, rolls down the slanted desk, and kisses a bundle of dry scroll wrappers like it's proposing marriage. You notice too late. A small flame licks up the side of the papyrus. You freeze, your brain scrambles through every saint you've ever prayed to and finds none qualified to handle this. Fire, you yell, lunging forward with your sleeve. Anna hears it first, then Demetrios, then chaos. Helena bolts from the back alcove, her arms full of damp cloths meant for binding repairs. Where's the fire bucket? She shrieks. You point wildly. It's gone! Someone shouts, I saw it in the lavatorium yesterday. Why would it be there? I don't know. Maybe someone thought fire breaks out near chamber pots. Anna's already beating the flames with the hem of her robe, muttering prayers with more venom than reverence. You grab one of the old wax tablets and smack at the smoking scroll like you're fending off a demon with your grocery list. The smell of scorched parchment fills the air. Finally, mercifully, the flame dies. All that's left is a blackened patch of mosaic tile, a half-melted candle stub, and the crispy remains of a minor sermon on the moral dangers of wearing colorful shoes. It's almost poetic. You sit down, chest heaving, sweat prickling under your collar. Helena flops beside you and passes a cup of water. "So," she says deadpan, "should we tell the patriarch you burned his favorite scroll?" "Only if I can blame the stars." Demetrios, breathless and somehow holding a damp sponge, mutters, "That scroll was garbage anyway. The monk who wrote it thought thunder was caused by flying saints." Still, you feel awful. That was history, now it's just ash. The incident has left the scriptorium smelling like roasted walnut and stress. You all start opening shutters despite the chill, letting the winter air bite through the smoky haze. Anna says, "This is why we have rules about candle holders." "Maybe if the library had more than 3 fire buckets," you shoot back. She pauses, then nods reluctantly. "We'll requisition more." That's Byzantine bureaucracy for maybe in 6 months. You and Helena get assigned firewatch duty, an honorary title that mostly means pacing and making sure no one lights anything near anything. During your rounds, you stumble across something curious: the remnants of the missing fire bucket, now full of sand, propping open a window in the storage room. You stare at it, unimpressed. Next to it, a wax tablet with a scrawl: "Needed ventilation. Bucket was handy. Will return later. M." You're going to find M, and you're going to educate them on irony. You drag the bucket back to the scriptorium, dump the sand onto the herb bed outside, and slam it down next to the main desk. Everyone applauds sarcastically. "Hero of the day," Demetrios announces. "Guardian of buckets," Helena adds. "Saint of the almost blaze," Anna mutters, writing the incident into the damage ledger. It's not the first fire you've had to handle. Won't be the last. One time, a monk accidentally set an entire stack of psalters alight during a lightning storm. He insisted he was using the candles to draw out the static demons. You're still not sure what that meant. Historians still argue whether Byzantine archives had standard fireproofing or if everyone just hoped for divine intervention. Based on your experience, hope was the primary safety mechanism. Once the room settles, you're assigned cleanup. You kneel and collect the scorched fragments of the scroll. There's not much left, just the curled outer edge and a bit of the opening line. You gently brush ash into a cloth bag, feeling weirdly like a funeral director. You glance down and read what's left. "And thus, even in flame, the soul may sing." You sit back on your heels, quietly stunned. For all its ranting about footwear, that sermon might have been more insightful than you gave it credit for. You tuck the fragment into the fire log, an actual book, ironically, and scribble a note. "Scroll perished in candle accident. Final line retained. Smelled terrible. Soul may be intact." Then you close the book and stretch. Your tunic still smells like charcoal. Your hands are streaked with soot and wax. Your nerves are barely stitched together. But the fire is out, and the library is still standing. You look around at the other scribes, all slowly returning to their desks. Some are shaking their heads. Others just dive back into their copying as if nothing happened. That's the rhythm here. Chaos, followed by calm, followed by ink. You pass Demetrios on your way back to your station. He raises a quill in salute. "Nice save." You smirk. "Next time, you're the one smacking flames with a wax tablet." He laughs. "Deal, as long as it's not my scroll." Back at your desk, you light a new candle, with a much heavier base this time, and gently ease back into your copying. This time, it's a love poem disguised as a parable. Beautiful metaphors, lots of references to Benia's rain, and a surprisingly steamy bit about olive oil. You smile. Somehow, despite the fire and the fuss and the endless bureaucracy, you still get to handle things like this. Words that whisper across centuries. Ideas that refuse to die, even when they almost go up in smoke. There's something almost holy about a quiet afternoon. You're finally back in a rhythm, copying a manuscript with careful, meditative strokes. The scriptorium hums with focus, quills scratching, pages turning, the occasional frustrated sigh from Demetrios when he forgets how to spell apostolic again. Then the front door swings open with a creak that might as well have been a trumpet blast. Pilgrims. Of course, they flood in. 10, maybe 15 of them, faces red from the wind, cloaks dripping snowmelt, and eyes wide with expectation. You can smell them before you see them. Sweat, dust, cheap incense, and boiled cabbage. A potent blend. You sigh and look at Anna. She stares at the newcomers, expression flat as a wall. Why are they in the scriptorium? A younger monk, eyes too bright and sleeves too clean, scurries in after them. They ask to see the sacred text. You whisper through gritted teeth, "This isn't a museum. It's a monastery library with fire hazards." Helena mutters, "They're getting to sneeze on everything." You're all pressed into service, because apparently today you're not just a librarian, you're also a tour guide, crowd control, and a living exhibit. You plaster on your best fake smile and approach the nearest cluster. A woman in a mud-splattered cloak is staring at a bookshelf like it's about to grant her sainthood. You clear your throat gently. Please don't touch the scrolls. They're fragile and also irreplaceable. She gasps, "Are any of these written by Jesus?" You blink. "No, but we do have a letter by someone who once met a cousin of someone who saw a man who claimed to have met St. Paul's donkey." She nods solemnly. Another pilgrim, older, possibly a priest, though his stole looks more like a towel, leans in to inspect a bound gospel. "Is this real gold on the edges?" "Yes," you answer, "which is why we keep it behind glass." He breathes on the glass anyway. You resist the urge to throttle him with a bookmark. Historians still argue whether pilgrims helped preserve manuscripts by spreading interest, or endangered them by smudging everything with their grubby little fingers. Today, you're leaning toward the latter. You lead them toward the central display, a beautifully illuminated manuscript of the Psalms, housed in a wooden case. Most walk right past it, but one teen lingers. Something about him feels twitchy. His hands keep brushing the folds of his tunic like he's deciding whether or not to commit theft. You narrow your eyes. "Cool drawings," he mutters, staring a little too long at the gold leaf margins. You nod slowly. "Yep, one of a kind, worth a bishop's ransom, which means if anything happens to it, we'll have to track down whoever was closest to it." He blinks at you. You smile sweetly. "That would be you." He backs away with exaggerated innocence. "I wasn't going to do anything." "Of course not," you say, already planning to follow him with the stealth of a moderately paranoid hawk. Elsewhere, Demetrios is fending off a woman who insists she should be allowed to borrow a scroll because she had a dream about St. George in a book. "No lending," he says flatly. "But it's a sign. It's a sign that you should visit the chapel." The noise rises. One pilgrim tries to open a cabinet that hasn't been touched since Emperor Leo's iconoclast phase. Another asks you if touching Latin makes you forget Greek. A small child starts pulling at the corner of a codex like it's a flap on a storybook. You lunge. "Not a toy, please don't touch that. It's older than your entire family." The child stares at you, unimpressed. Probably thinks you're just a sweaty scroll goblin. Fair. You usher the group into a side chamber where they can safely admire some facsimiles, copies designed for hands-on viewing. You launch into your standard speech. These manuscripts are replicas. The originals are kept under controlled conditions, away from light, moisture, fire, rodents, curious fingers, and well-meaning pilgrims. Someone asks how long it takes to make a book like this. You smile. Always the same answer. A full Psalter, 2 years minimum. Longer if the illuminator's having a crisis of faith. Helena appears beside you. "We once waited 6 months for blue pigment. The donkey carrying it fell off a bridge." True story, donkey survived. The pigment did not. You make a note in your wax tablet. Watch out for fast-handed teenagers, possible manuscript liquor. Back in the scriptorium, the pilgrims are finally gone. You close the door behind them, bolt it with great ceremony, and lean your forehead against the cool stone in relief. Demetrios walks past with a cup of chicory. You missed it. One of them tried to feed bread to the anatomical diagrams. You groan. Next time, you say, "I'm hiding in the archive cellar." Helena smirks. "Too obvious. That's where I'll be." You smile despite yourself. Somehow everything's still standing. No scrolls stolen. No saints disrespected too badly. No children cursed by ancient glosses. Just another day in the life of a Byzantine librarian slash security guard. And now, back to the ink. You return to your desk just in time to catch the tail end of what can only be described as a monastic roast battle. Two monks, both red in the face and armed with quills like swords, are going at it across the scriptorium's center table. At first, you think they're arguing over scripture. Typical. But no. Today's theological crisis? Script styles. One favors the more traditional Wuxi-style script, rounded, stately, beloved by old-school scribes and chronic back pain. The other insists on minuscule, faster to write, easier to read, and apparently a sign of divine evolution. Your minuscule looks like a drunk goat tried to write Greek, sneers the unsealed fan. At least mine doesn't take half a scroll to say grace, snaps back the other. You lean against a pillar, sipping your now cold chicory brew, thoroughly entertained. It's not unusual for scribes to get opinionated. You've seen full-out silent feuds fought through margin spacing and the passive-aggressive omission of footnotes. This is just the spoken version. Anna walks past, not even looking up. If they start throwing ink again, they clean it themselves. You nod. The last time that happened, 3 psalters got tattooed with blue blotches and the bishop's birthday announcement had to be recopied from scratch. Helena joins you, arms crossed. I give them 5 minutes before someone brings up Latin. You glance at the nearest sandglass. 3, tops. As if on cue, the unsiled loyalist bellows. At least I don't write like a ruined schoolboy. Boom, there it is. Demetrios leans over from the next table. 10 coins says they start quoting Cicero before it's over. You raise an eyebrow. Make it 20 if they quote Aristotle and still get it wrong. Historians still argue whether the scriptorium was a space of harmony or barely contained chaos. You know better. It's a cold war made of letters and ligatures. And now it's turning into a full-on cold snark war. One of the monks, Eustathios you think, points to a scroll that's been recopied 3 times in different styles. This, he declares, was written the way the saints intended. His rival, Niketas, snorts. The saints intended us to write legibly. I've seen worms with steadier script. You look at the scroll. It is beautifully done, if a bit pompous. The illuminated capitals have more gold leaf than a royal bribe. But you stay out of it. Mostly, until they both turn to you. You, which is better? Eustathios demands. Niketas grins. Yes. Tell us, O neutral guardian of truth. You look between them. 2 grown men, one of whom once cried over a misspelled Jerusalem, the other who hoards parchment, scraps like a dragon with anxiety. You shrug. Depends. Are we copying imperial decrees or love poems written in code? A pause, then grudging laughter, crisis averted, for now. They return to their desks, still muttering under their breath, but no longer throwing metaphysical daggers. You sit back down and pull out your own scroll, only to realize it's covered in notes that aren't yours. You squint. Someone's written a full critique of your handwriting in the margin, in verse. Too much loop in the gamma's tail, makes meaning fade and tempers fail. You snort. Nice. Next time leave a name so I know who to mock. Helena peers over. You got roasted in meter, that's how you know you've made it. You push the scroll aside and unroll a new one, an imported commentary on the Gospels in Latin. The script's fine if a bit stilted. The real gem? The marginal notes. One says, I think the scribe was drunk or inspired, possibly both. Another, do not trust the fish in John 21. Too big, symbolic probably. You found your people, not the saints, not the scribes, the marginal note gremlins, your ancestors. Halfway through your new copying task, a beetle walks across your desk like it owns the place. You flick it gently into a discarded manuscript wrapper and whisper, go critique someone else's gamma loops. You get back into the zone, blocking out the noise. Downstroke, pause, loop, breathe. The rhythm returns. You're not just copying anymore. You're interpreting, translating, breathing life into tired letters. Every line is a chant. Every symbol, a whisper from another century. You pause only once to redip your quill. A warm light slants through the high window, catching the pond on a nearby illuminated initial. It glows like fire trapped in ink. You look around. The monks have settled down. Eustathios is muttering psalms, and Nicetas is quietly eating a date from a pouch he swore he didn't bring. Peace has returned, for now. But tomorrow, you'll probably all argue again about whether uppercase letters are a sign of theological pride, and you'll love every minute of it. There's something quietly miserable about copying under candlelight. Not because you dislike it. There's a strange, almost sacred beauty to the dim, flickering glow of beeswax halos hovering above parchment. But your eyes, they disagree, they hate it, they revolt. You're 3 verses into a passage from Ecclesiastes when the light shifts again, throwing a long diagonal shadow across your work. The candles not burning evenly, dancing every time someone so much as breathes nearby. You squint at the last word you wrote. It was supposed to be vanity. You wrote variety. Philosophically adjacent, maybe, but wrong. You sigh and reach for your scraping knife, your best friend and greatest shame. It's already dulled from a week of mistakes, and it takes a solid minute to peel the ink off without tearing the parchment. A beetle crawls across your desk right into your ink pot. You fish it out with the end of your stylus, holding it up to eye level. Do you mind, you whisper? It wiggles a leg in what might be defiance. You flick it onto the floor. It lands with a skitter and disappears under a pile of scroll wrappers, probably off to ruin someone else's late-night transcription. Outside, the wind howls against the shutters, making them creak like moaning saints. You wrap your wool cloak tighter around your shoulders. No one told you candlelight also meant draft central. The room smells of wax, mold, and a faint trace of pickled onions from someone's forgotten dinner pouch. You reach for the next sheet of parchment, flipping it carefully, only to find a faint shoe print across the top. Helena walks by just then, munching on a piece of dried apple. Found a Psalter page under my foot, she says casually. That explains the boot theology. She laughs, then leans over your shoulder to look at your copy. Your row is starting to look like a limp fish. You groan. I haven't blinked in 45 minutes. I think my eyelids are frozen. She pats your shoulder. Take a break before you copy the genealogy of Christ as a shopping list. Already happened once. Melchi begat Addy, who begat lentils. Copying under candlelight was supposed to be romantic. That's what the novices think. The glow, the quiet, the hum of monks singing down the hall. And yes, it can be. But mostly, it's pain. Literal eye pain, spine pain, soul pain when you realize you've just copied the same word 3 times in a row without noticing. You glance back at your work. Sure enough, vanity, vanity, vanity. It's fine, Ecclesiastes won't mind. Historians still argue whether Byzantine scribes worked better in daylight or lamplight. The romantic answer is candlelight. The honest answer? Daylight always. But try telling that to an empire that thinks dusk is the perfect time to push out another 50 lines of commentary on predestination. You sigh, adjust your seat, and dip the quill again. The ink is clumping. You stir it with the butt of the stylus, watching the bubbles break the surface like tiny curses. This particular batch of iron gall ink is older than your patience. You were supposed to replace it last week, but the good stuff is locked in the apothecary's cabinet, and Brother Kyriakos lost the key. Again. You keep going anyway. Every few lines, your eyes drift to the margin where some previous scribe doodled a bird wearing a crown. You don't know why, but it's become your unofficial mascot. King Pigeon, you whisper. Grant me strength. Suddenly, a loud crack splits the silence. Everyone jumps. Demetrios yelps and drops his quill. Anna nearly topples a candle. You all look around wildly until someone spots the source. The ceiling beam. It's shifted. Helena stares up at it. It's the cold. Wood's expanding. You mutter, or King Pigeon is displeased. A moment of uneasy silence follows. Then slowly everyone returns to their work. You finish your passage, rubbing your eyes. They're burning now, every blink like sandpaper. You could stop. You should stop, but you're close to finishing this sheet. And that means you'll get to stand, stretch, maybe even walk to the warming brazier for a hit of blessed heat. So you press on, downstroke, loop, pause. The rhythm returns. You lean into it, letting the repetition dull your frustration. It's almost meditative, until your quill slips. You've just drawn a line across the margin. A long, awkward, unsanctioned diagonal stroke cutting through the divine order of your otherwise clean page. You stare at it. You don't scream, you don't cry. You simply reach for your scraping knife again, and you begin the dance of undoing. That's the work. Not perfection, correction. You finish just as the seventh hour bell tolls. Everyone exhales in quiet relief. The scribes begin to rise, stretching, groaning, comparing ink stains like old soldiers showing off battle scars. You roll up your parchment, mark the last completed section with a scrap of dyed ribbon, and blow out your candle. The room goes dim, lit only by the soft flicker of a few distant flames. As you stand, your knees creak like floorboards in an old church. You shuffle toward the brazier and stand there a moment, hands outstretched. The heat seeps into your bones, into your lungs, into that part of your brain that briefly forgot what warmth felt like. You were hoping the mice had taken the night off, but no, of course not. It's late, too late for anyone to be working but you, Helena, and the mice. The scriptorium is half dark, candles guttering low, and the wind has decided to howl like a neglected choir again. You should be asleep. Instead, you're hunched over a scroll of the Iliad, repairing a torn edge where some long-dead scribe got aggressive with a quill. And that's when you hear it. Scritch, scritch, scritch. You freeze mid-stitch. Helena's head pops up from behind a stack of codices. Tell me that's not what I think it is. It is. She groans and disappears again, rummaging in a drawer. You stand slowly, creeping toward the sound. It's coming from the back wall, right near the shelf where the Homeric epics are stored. Naturally, because mice, apparently, have a taste for poetry. You round the corner and spot the culprit. A chubby little rodent nibbling at the corner of book 11. Its whiskers twitch. Its beady eyes meet yours. No fear. Pure audacity. Drop the scroll, you whisper. It doesn't. It nibbles harder. You lunge. It bolts, scroll in tow. You grab the nearest object, a worn sandal someone left behind, and give chase. You and the mouse tear across the floor in a mad dance of desperation and vengeance. Scroll fragments trail behind it like breadcrumbs. The mouse dives under a shelf. You throw the sandal. It hits a column with a satisfying clonk, but misses the target by about a century. You fall to your knees and shove your arm under the shelf. Nothing. You sit back, panting, holding a half-chewed strip of Iliad. Lines 423 to 437. Lost forever to rodent hunger. Helena, you groan. It's eating Homer again. She reappears holding a small brass bell and a smirk. I told you we should have moved him to the upper shelf. You said that about Origin and we nearly lost our arms to falling commentary. Fair. She rings the bell. Not because it scares mice, it doesn't, but because it makes her feel like she's doing something. You both huddle around the chewed scroll, inspecting the damage. Not too bad, she says. Could have been worse. It ate the line about Diomedes wounding Ares. She shrugs. Honestly, that mouse has taste. You gather the fragments and tuck them into the damage box. The box is getting full. It's labeled rodent casualties, reconciliation pending. There's a scholarly debate, of course there is, about how much damage vermin actually caused to medieval texts. Some say they were incidental pests. Others argue that entire sections of history were lost to teeth and droppings. You've seen enough shredded margins and chewed bindings to fall firmly in the mice are the enemy of civilization camp. And yet, part of you respects them, sort of. They're survivors like you, living in corners, dodging disaster, nibbling what they can from the scraps of empire. Still, you reinforce the Homer shelf with lavender satchels. Mice hate the smell, or at least they're supposed to. The mouse from earlier didn't seem to mind. Probably one of the elite, herb-tolerant breeds. Demetrios once joked that the mice here were trained by the Persians. You don't entirely disagree. You return to your desk, trying to shake off the adrenaline. The scroll you were repairing lies open, its thread dangling like a limp question. You stitch it closed, slowly, carefully. This one's a later copy of the Iliad, written in a more compact Greek hand. Margins filled with commentary, some serious, some absurd. One note reads, "This battle too long, needs a dragon." You smile. Somewhere, some scribe centuries ago also got bored and daydreamed about mythical upgrades. Helena sits back at her desk, lighting a new candle. She tosses you a date wrapped in fig leaf. You look like you need sugar. You chew it slowly. It helps. You glance up at the ceiling. It's dark, soot-stained, dripping wax at random. One drop hits the floor with a soft plip, just enough to make you wonder if the gods are still watching. Maybe they are. Maybe they're laughing. After all, you spend your days preserving the wisdom of millennia and your nights chasing mice with shoes. You resume your repair work. The parchment softens under your hands. The thread moves like breath. You lose yourself in the rhythm again. And then, without looking up, you ask, Helena? Yeah? If mice eat enough Homer, do they dream in dactylic hexameter? She thinks for a second. Only if they've got taste. You think this might be your last scroll of the day. At least, that's the lie you tell yourself as you ease into the stiff-backed chair and unfurl a brittle roll of parchment that feels like it's aged faster than the empire itself. The edges crumble slightly when touched. You wince and whisper your usual blessing over it. Don't fall apart. Not today. It's a repair job, the kind you usually push to tomorrow's version of yourself. But tomorrow you is already overwhelmed, so here you are, again, wrangling a torn, humidity-warped scroll that someone apparently used as a coaster during a feast. The ink is faded, the fibers swollen. Your fingers trace the lines gently, feeling for splits and weak points. You lift the broken segment, pin it under a soft weight, and breathe out, slowly. You begin. The needle you use for stitching repairs is small, blunt, and as overworked as you are. It moves through the parchment with the delicacy of a heartbeat, threading flaxen line through centuries of thought. You pull it through, tighten, knot, and again. The scroll is a commentary on the Hexameron, the 6 days of creation. It's dense, philosophical, filled with metaphors that make you feel like you're drowning in light and then trying to name it. But what strikes you isn't the content, it's the marginal notes. They're strange. Someone, likely a monk, left little comments between the lines. But they're not scriptural reflections. They're personal. Woke to a dream of burning rivers. Still afraid. Fast ended after 3 days, bread has never tasted so alive. Today, I looked into the eyes of a dying man and felt joy. Is that sin? You pause, set the scroll down. For a moment, the entire library disappears. The walls, the chill, the endless buzzing of thought. It's just you and this voice speaking through centuries. Someone who lived, worked, and doubted right here, maybe at this very table. Someone with shaky hands and a tired heart who decided to write this into the sacred margins. You continue the repair, slower now. Reverent, historians still argue whether personal notes like these were tolerated or hidden in plain sight, trusting the next reader to either understand or ignore. You think they're confessions, not for forgiveness, but for connection. The writer didn't want to be alone, not then, not now. You finish the last stitch. The scroll holds, barely. You close your eyes, then open them to see a drop of ink on your sleeve. Of course, because peace is fleeting, you dab it with a damp cloth, half smiling. You almost got me. Helena's snoring softly across the room, curled around a pile of folios like a particularly grumpy cat. Demetrios has vanished, probably pretending to check firewood stocks, which really means he's asleep behind the altar. The room is nearly empty, just you, the candlelight, and the scroll in your lap. And yet, something feels unfinished. You look over at the needs work pile. You promised yourself you wouldn't touch it, but there it is, top of the stack, a thin roll bound in faded blue twine. No label, just a tag, unknown, damaged, unsorted. Curiosity wins. It always does. You unwrap it carefully. Inside, fragments of a letter, incomplete. Some parts torn, others smeared with water damage. But what's legible makes your breath catch. And when the sea rose, we carried the books above our heads. We lost the Psalter, but saved the names of the saints. The librarian wept, not for the scrolls, but for the stories inside them. You trace the ink with your finger. It's not a royal report, not a theological treatise, Just a letter, probably from a monk, maybe a junior scribe. It describes a flood in a coastal monastery in the desperate attempt to save what they could. You imagine it, the storm surging, monks wading waist-deep through icy water, lifting manuscripts toward heaven like they were children. Maybe they were, in a way. You roll it back up and place it in your satchel. Not for repair, for safekeeping. You'll bring it to Anna tomorrow. It deserves more than the unknown pile. You rub your eyes. They ache. Your hands are trembling slightly. You stand, blow out the candle, and stretch until your spine clicks back into place like a reluctant door latch. Everything is quiet again. Just the whispers of the past, the hum of texts breathing through the shelves. You swear you can still hear the ink drying. This is the slow miracle you live with daily. Not grand revelations, just scrolls holding together when they shouldn't. Words surviving teeth, fire, rot, and time. Questions left in the margins like breadcrumbs through centuries. Tonight you dream in margins, but before that, there's still one last ritual. You close up the scriptorium, snuffing each candle one by one until the room is swallowed in warm shadow. The last wick hisses like it's annoyed to be ending early. Outside, the hallway echoes with faint footsteps and the occasional cough from a late praying monk. You shuffle down toward the dormitory, your satchel heavy with scroll fragments, notes to transcribe, and a half-eaten fig pastry someone stuffed in when you weren't looking. Probably Helena. You pass by the chapel, peeking in. One candle still burns beneath the icon of the Theotokos. A novice kneels in silence, eyes shut, mouthing something to the darkness. You remember being that devout once. You still believe, mostly. But these days, your faith looks a lot more like a page half-inked and slightly smudged. A work in progress. You reach your cell, a narrow room with a wooden cot, a small table, and a view of the courtyard wall, thrilling. You shrug off your robe and sit, massaging ink-stiff fingers. Your legs ache. Your back protests every movement. And your brain, dear heavens, your brain is still trying to decode the last line from that flood-damaged letter. But you're done for now. You light a stub of candle on your desk, just enough to see, and open your personal journal. Not an official manuscript. Just your own battered book, filled with scribbled observations, odd quotes, strange dreams, and the occasional grocery list. You write one line. Today I chased a mouse, rescued Homer, and watched a scroll almost weep. It's enough. You underline enough, then you close the journal. The city outside is sleeping, or trying to. Constantinople never quite shuts up. Somewhere in the distance, a couple argues in slurred Latin. A dog barks at what might be a shadow. The hippodrome's wind chimes clang lazily in the dark. You lie down on the cot. The straw pokes you like it always does. The blanket smells faintly of old wool and slightly newer mildew, but it's warm enough. You pull it over your shoulders and exhale slowly. The candle flickers. Your eyelids grow heavy, and soon you drift. Your dreams arrive softly like footnotes to your day. In one, the manuscripts walk on their own, scrolls dancing through the halls, codices whispering secrets to each other in Greek, Latin, and languages you don't even know. You follow them, barefoot and grinning, as golden saints crawl out of the margins and begin a solemn procession around your bed. In another, the entire library floats above the sea, tethered only by threads of ink. You're repairing it stitch by stitch, and the water below speaks in riddles made of psalms. Helena's there. So is Demetrios. Anna guards the index shelf like a general. You feel safe, and somewhere deep in the folds of your dream, you see it again. That line in the scroll. If I am forgotten, let the ink remember. You smile in your sleep, because you know it will. And now, everything begins to fade. The candle burns low in your dream. The scrolls roll themselves back up. The ink dries. The voices in the margins go quiet, like friends finally nodding off after a long, whispered conversation. The night holds the library in its arms, still and deep. You imagine the city outside, muffled by fog, rooftops kissed with frost. No footsteps now, no arguments, just the slow hush of sleep settling over Constantinople. Your breath evens out. The straw bed creaks once beneath you, then falls silent. Even the mice, ever vigilant, curl into corners and pause their restless search for parchment. The scriptorium waits for morning. It always does. You don't need to hold on to the words anymore. Let them go. Let the manuscripts dream their dreams. Let the pages flutter in the breeze behind your mind's eye. And let that soft, golden glow of candlelight linger just a little longer as it fades into the dark. The ink remembers. The scrolls endure. And you've done enough. So let go of the day. Let it fall away like a scrap of parchment, carried off by a warm breeze. Sink, drift, float on the quiet hum of time and words in history, soft as wax, deep as vellum. You are safe, you are home, and you are not alone in the silence. Good night, librarian.